The chilled sandwich tray slammed down like a verdict: no silverware, no apology, just wilted lettuce and a lukewarm bottle of water. Around her, champagne flutes clinked and laughter echoed. But for Alexandria Cole, the only black woman in first class on Altavia Flight 312, the message was clear: you don't belong here. They didn't know who they were dismissing. But they were about to find out. Leave a comment below to let me know what you think about this story. And subscribe to the channel to follow more meaningful stories. Alexandria Cole sat poised in seat 1A, the best seat on Altavia Airlines' elite international route from New York to Zurich. She was no stranger to luxury or the subtle glances that often came with it. At 5 feet 10 inches, her presence was magnetic. Her dark navy tailored suit draped perfectly over her elegant frame, and the polished black leather heels clicked lightly against the cabin floor. Her hair, tightly coiled and swept into a graceful updo, gleamed under the soft cabin lighting. A laminated nameplate rested discreetly by her seat: Alexandria Cole, Diamond Premier member. She didn't need the recognition. Her name already spoke for itself. As the founder and CEO of Coltech Dynamics, the company behind a revolutionary AI-based cybersecurity system now used by federal institutions, Alexandria had become an industry titan. Forbes Incorporated and Tech Republic had all labeled her one of the most powerful women in technology 3 years in a row. This flight was no vacation. She was headed to finalize a $2.7 billion cross-continental partnership with a Swiss innovation firm, one that would place Coltech at the center of Europe's data security market. It wasn't just business, it was history. A black female CEO leading a tech empire into international territory. And as always, she had pre-ordered her signature meal, lobster bisque followed by USDA prime filet mignon, paired with a bottle of Chateau Montclair 09. It was her ritual on every international route: luxury with purpose. She placed her slim leather laptop case in the overhead bin, then slipped into her seat with the grace of a woman who had climbed every rung of the ladder herself. Alexandria didn't need to prove she belonged, she was the benchmark. A flight attendant passed, giving a nod that barely met her eyes. His gaze landed more comfortably on the white man behind her. Alexandria gave a small smile, saying nothing. She'd seen that reflex more times than she cared to count. A politeness so automatic, it revealed the very bias it tried to conceal. Soon, the first wave of passengers had boarded, and the lights dimmed into the warm amber hue Altavia reserved for first-class ambience. Seat 1A wrapped Alexandria in its curated luxury plush Italian leather, a whisper-quiet cabin, and chilled towel service by the minute. But beneath the stitched comfort, she felt it, the old undertone of exclusion. Not spoken. Just felt. The curtain closed gently behind her, separating first class from the rest of the plane. And then she heard it. "Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Chelsea. I'll be your server today." Alexandria looked up. Chelsea Whitman stood poised, her platinum blonde hair tied into a tight chignon. Her voice was smooth but practiced, her smile tight but hollow. Behind her was a tray of drinks but none offered. Her pale blue eyes scanned Alexandria from her curly bun to the gold ring on her finger, lingering for a second too long before glancing away. "I believe you received my meal reservation," Alexandria said evenly, her voice cool but composed. Chelsea's smile twitched. Yes. We've seen it in the system. We'll be serving meals once we're airborne and stable." She turned and walked off without another word. Alexandria's brows pulled together slightly. She had encountered hundreds of Chelseas in her career, people who never said anything wrong, but whose tone, posture, and timing said everything. The people who believed that power only came in one shade. And that she, no matter the credentials, must have been lucky to be here. Behind her, the cabin clinked with laughter. "Champagne before takeoff?" "Now that's service," a booming voice said. Alexandria didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew that voice. Bradley Keene, CEO of Keene Capital. He had once called her intense for a woman during a conference Q&A. Further back was Mason Trent, venture analyst, and Charles Devereaux, fintech founder. Together they represented everything the world expected of first class: white, male, smug. Chelsea returned to the front of the cabin with a tray in her hands and that same familiar smile on her face, the one Alexandria had begun to recognize not as courtesy, but as camouflage. The warmth, the attention, the attentiveness, it was all there, but never directed at her. "I'm sorry, Miss Cole, but we've run out of premium meals. All we have left is a cold chicken sandwich and water," Chelsea said, placing the tray in front of her like a cafeteria worker. Alexandria didn't blink. "I pre-ordered last week. I have confirmation emails and booking receipts." Chelsea shrugged, a flick of her notepad fluttering like it didn't matter. "Could be a system thing. It happens. Sorry." From her seat, Alexandria watched as Chelsea leaned in toward Mr. Keene in 1C, gently placing a linen napkin over his lap before pouring his second glass of champagne. She laughed softly at a joke he'd made, something about mergers and martinis, and touched his wrist lightly as she handed him a silver spoon with the dessert menu. Moments later, she greeted Mr. Devereaux by name, offering him the chocolate mousse unprompted. She adjusted his seat's lighting, topped off his wine, tucked his dessert tray with care. When she finally arrived at 1A, the difference was stark. No greeting. No smile. Just a lukewarm sandwich in a plastic wrap, dropped onto the tray with a thud that echoed louder than any insult. Alexandria didn't react right away. She studied Chelsea's posture, the casual indifference in her movement, the absence of eye contact. Then she spoke quietly, but with words sharp enough to still the air. "Did you just run out of lobster bisque, or out of courtesy too?" Chelsea flinched. Just slightly. She hadn't expected confrontation. "Oh," she replied, recovering her smile, "I thought you prefer something lighter. Some passengers don't care much for the richer options." There it was. The coded language. The implication. Alexandria tilted her head, her voice lower, now measured and surgical. "Some passengers, or passengers like me?" Chelsea's smile thinned, her fingers tightening around the edge of the serving tray. "I didn't mean anything by it. It's not always about you." "No," Alexandria said, folding her hands calmly. "It rarely is. That's the pattern, isn't it?" She gestured subtly with her chin toward the other side of the cabin. "I noticed you greeted Mr. Keene and Mr. Trent by name. Mr. Devereaux got champagne before the seatbelt sign even went off. You adjusted his napkin, refilled his glass. No request needed." She paused, letting the silence hang. "And then there's me." Chelsea remained frozen, unsure whether to defend or retreat. "No name. No greeting. No eye contact," Alexandria continued. "Just a sandwich and a shrug." Her tone was still calm, but the precision was unrelenting. "Same way you ignored the South Asian woman in 3A when she asked for a blanket. Or how the black gentleman in business class pressed his call button twice and got nothing." Chelsea's voice was thin now, her professionalism showing signs of wear. "I assure you, I treat all passengers with the same level of respect." Alexandria's smile returned, small and sharp. "You mean the same way you respect the ones you don't see?" Chelsea didn't respond. Instead, she offered a tight nod and turned away, retreating toward the galley like a shadow fleeing the light. And Alexandria, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Because now, she had seen it clearly. The bias wasn't in what was said. It was in what was consistently denied. Around her, the laughter continued. The clinks of crystal glasses. The warm plates of filet, caviar, and truffle risotto being handed out row by row. Not to her. Her fingers tapped gently on the armrest. 1. 2. 3. A rhythm of resolve. She had built a billion-dollar company, pitched to military contractors, and outmaneuvered Silicon Valley elites who underestimated her at every step. She had no need to raise her voice. But she wasn't going to let this pass. Not because of the food. But because of the pattern. Because if people like Chelsea were never challenged, they would keep dismissing women like Alexandria as if invisibility were policy. And this time, they had picked the wrong passenger. The chilled sandwich sat untouched in front of her, its plastic wrap reflecting the cabin lights like a joke gift at a billionaire's table. Alexandria Cole leaned back into her seat, her spine straight despite the insult. The murmurs around her continued, clinking glasses, low laughter, murmured conversations about stock splits and venture capital, but to her, it was static. The tray before her wasn't just a meal, it was a message. And the message was clear: you don't belong here. She had spent the last 20 years disproving that message, rising from a scholarship student who coded on borrowed laptops to the CEO of Coltech Dynamics, a company whose artificial intelligence software now powered the security protocols of over 200 financial institutions and 3 government agencies. She had earned her way into this seat 1A not through family connections, but through war rooms, pitch decks, and back-to-back 15-hour days. And yet here she was, staring at a cold sandwich and a bottle of water, while around her, the Bradley Keens and Mason Trents of the world were sipping Chateauneuf du Pape and discussing NFTs. Alexandria didn't raise her hand or demand attention. Instead, she reached for her smart watch, its interface flickering to life with a gentle pulse. In seconds, she was inside Coltech's executive security dashboard, an encrypted environment not even the most advanced commercial hackers could breach. She tapped through a hidden protocol labeled ERC Level Review, something designed for moments of operational compromise. Usually reserved for hostile takeover warnings, investor sabotage, or high-value data leaks. But tonight, it was for something subtler. And perhaps more dangerous. She searched the crew manifest. Her eyes scanned quickly. Name: Chelsea R. Whitman. Senior cabin crew. Employee ID, at 7123. Assigned to international prestige routes. Her file wasn't long, but it was telling. 3 flagged customer incidents in the past 2 years. Each involving non-white passengers. A diplomat's wife had complained about being served late. A black venture capitalist noted the eerily dismissive tone of the same attendant. None of the reports had triggered disciplinary action. Each closed with the same phrase: insufficient grounds for escalation. But Alexandria saw the pattern, as she always did. The repetition wasn't coincidence, it was systemized bias, normalized through neglect. She didn't need a smoking gun. She just needed the data trail. With a few swipes, she compiled the records, encrypted them under Level 5 clearance, and sent a direct message to her executive operations chief, Avery Brooks. The message was brief: activate culture audit protocol. Flight 312. Cabin crew ID at 7123. Confirm within 10 minutes. Thousands of miles away in New York City, Avery Brooks was already on alert. The ping arrived on her secure console inside the 43rd floor command suite of Coltech Tower. Avery didn't hesitate. She had worked with Alexandria long enough to know what the brevity of that message meant. No explanation was needed. The very fact that Alexandria had deployed an executive protocol mid-flight was all the confirmation she required. She opened Chelsea Whitman's service history, cross-referencing it with Coltech's proprietary tool, the Behavioral Interaction Index. Developed in-house by Coltech's AI team, the system analyzed subtle behavioral data across dozens of flights: tone variance, delayed response time, engagement patterns with minority passengers, even changes in smile duration. The result was swift and damning: bias score, 84.9%. Repeated selective behavior across 31 flights. High cultural risk rating. Avery compiled the findings into a 14-page report, encrypted it, and filed it under a priority flag reserved only for incidents with strategic brand implications. She included internal commentary, timestamps, and 3 flagged incident videos from previous flights. She didn't wait. The message went out immediately to Altavia's internal ethics board, the airline's VP of Client Experience, their general counsel, and the CEO himself. Subject line, Flagged Incident, Flight 312, Seat 1A, Immediate Attention Required. Back on board, Alexandria sat unmoved. She stared forward, eyes fixed on the stitched leather of the seat in front of her, while the cabin lights dimmed into a soft amber glow. Another attendant passed, an older gentleman with a neat uniform and silver-streaked hair. His name tag read Ronald Green. She raised her hand slightly. He stepped closer, polite, careful. "Yes, Miss Cole." She tilted her head gently. "I'm curious," she began, her voice low but firm, "when there's a shortage of pre-ordered premium meals, what determines which passengers still receive theirs?" He blinked once, then composed himself. "Generally, it depends on flight status, loyalty tier, and order timestamp. Sometimes there's some discretion allowed to cabin crew." His voice faltered slightly near the end. Alexandria didn't break eye contact. "I'm a Diamond Premier. I ordered my meal 7 days in advance. I received an email confirmation. And I've flown Altavia 12 times this year. Yet somehow, my reservation was missed, and only I received a sandwich." He nodded, but didn't reply. "No worries," she said calmly. "Just curious." Ronald bowed slightly and stepped away. She didn't need him to admit anything. She already had what she needed. Because the truth wasn't in his words. It was in the delay. In the hesitation. In the knowledge behind his eyes that this wasn't a one-off error, but something unspoken, something the crew didn't talk about, but quietly followed. And now, it had reached the wrong person. 10 minutes later, her watch vibrated gently. A secure notification lit up the screen. Audit protocol activated. Report in circulation. Confirmed receipt by all parties. Alexandria didn't smile. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. By the time Flight 312 touched down in Zurich, Chelsea Whitman's file would no longer be buried beneath years of internal dismissal. The system that had protected her indifference would be forced to answer for it. And Seat 1A, the seat that once symbolized exclusion, had just become the starting point of a cultural reckoning. The sandwich tray remained untouched as Flight 312 cruised quietly above the Atlantic. In the silence of first class, surrounded by polished wood grain, stitched Italian leather, and champagne-fueled conversations, Alexandria Cole became a statue of poise. She had not raised her voice. She had not asked to see a supervisor. She had not whispered a word of complaint to the smiling faces parading past her with silver trays and name-perfect greetings. Because she knew, silence, when held with purpose, was louder than any confrontation. To the outside world, she looked like any other first-class passenger, a calm, successful businesswoman in a navy suit, sipping water and glancing at her tablet. But inside, something was shifting. Not rage. Not even disappointment. What stirred within her was something sharper. Precision. She tapped her smartwatch again, scrolling through the updated security feed. A fresh report had arrived from Avery. The full crew manifest had been pulled. Every interaction on this flight was now being logged and categorized by Colteca's real-time analytics engine, voice tone mapping, service order timestamps, proximity tracking. Already, the algorithm had flagged a 6-minute delay between her meal request and the crew's first response. Average across other passengers in first class. 42 seconds. She glanced briefly over her shoulder. 1C, Bradley Keene. Venture capitalist. Once declined her AI proposal in 2018 for being too idealistic. 1D, Mason Trent. Insurance analyst. Publicly questioned in a panel whether diverse founders could handle scale. 2A, Charles Devereaux. Founder of a fintech firm, previously accused of discriminatory hiring. Cleared due to lack of evidence. All three were now enjoying full-course meals served with paired wines and hot towels, laughing about digital currencies and private equity. None of them had noticed her sandwich. Or maybe they had, and simply didn't care. Another update vibrated gently on her wrist. Subject, Flight Attendant, Behavior Analysis Complete. Name, Chelsea R. Whitman. Bias Interaction Index, 84.9%. Pattern, delayed and diminished service for non-white passengers. Repetitive nonverbal dismissal behavior. It was all there, clinical, undeniable, factual. Alexandria saved the file and attached it to a legal preparation document titled, Service Discrepancy Escalation, Flight 312. No emotion. No commentary. Just data and documentation. She looked up as the curtain to the galley shifted. Chelsea returned, making her way through the rows with the same tailored posture and perfectly neutral expression. Alexandria watched carefully now, not just her own treatment, but the pattern. Chelsea bent slightly lower to refill Bradley's glass of wine. She laughed softly at something Mason whispered. She laid a hand gently on Charles's shoulder while offering dessert. A chocolate mousse topped with gold flakes. None of them asked for it. They were simply offered. Chelsea's eyes never once strayed toward Alexandria. It was surgical. Calculated. Alexandria didn't interrupt. She observed. When Chelsea turned and began heading back to the galley, Alexandria pressed the call button. Just once. Quiet. Intentional. The sound was barely audible. But it rang all the way to the front of the plane. A moment later, Ronald Green appeared. His expression was neutral, but there was something tighter in his shoulders now. Something watchful. Yes, Miss Cole. Alexandria leaned slightly forward. Her voice was soft but unwavering. Earlier, you mentioned that crew discretion plays a part in meal prioritization. I'd like to understand how that discretion works when every standard was met, and yet a Diamond Premier passenger was overlooked. Ronald hesitated. The silence stretched. He looked toward the galley, then back at her. I don't believe that was intentional, ma'am. Sometimes, things happen. The system may have been delayed. Or there could have been last-minute substitutions. Alexandria's gaze didn't shift. I ordered 7 days ago. Confirmed by email and text. I've flown this route more than a dozen times. I was the first passenger seated today. And I'm the only one without a premium meal. Ronald swallowed, then nodded slowly. Understood. That's all, she said, then turned her face back toward the window. Ronald stepped away, his shoes nearly silent against the plush carpet. In her periphery, Alexandria saw Chelsea glance over as Ronald returned to the galley, but there was no change in her expression. Still composed. Still untouched. Still unaware of the slow unraveling that had already begun. Her watch vibrated again. Message from Avery Brooks. All behavioral data validated. Initial evidence submitted to Altavia's Global Ethics inbox. Escalation flagged as cultural breach, Tier 1. Preparing legal documentation per Morgan Framework Protocol. Confirmation from airline legal expected before touchdown. Alexandria nodded to herself. No calls. No confrontations. No media. Everything was moving, exactly as it should. She didn't need to shout. She had just turned a cold sandwich into a corporate crisis. Outside the cabin windows, the endless dark stretched across the Atlantic. But inside, every step Chelsea took, every tray she delivered, every passenger she smiled at and every one she didn't was being watched, logged, categorized, and preserved. Not by cameras. Not by whispers. But by the woman in seat 1A who had decided that tonight, silence would no longer mean surrender. By the time the wheels touched down in Zurich, the storm would be waiting on the runway. And for the first time in her career, Chelsea Whitman wouldn't be able to shrug it off. The wheels touched down with a long screech that vibrated through the fuselage, and for a moment, the entire first-class cabin held its breath. The tires met the Zurich runway like punctuation sharp, final. Seatbelt signs remained lit, engines were down, and the hushed voice of the captain came through the intercom with a greeting in 3 languages. But Alexandria Cole wasn't listening. Her mind had already shifted, calculating, watching, waiting. She didn't rush to unbuckle her belt like the others. Her posture remained steady, composed. While passengers behind her reached overhead for designer carry-ons and folded coats, she sat still, her fingers grazing the edge of her armrest, her face calm. She had received 2 silent vibrations on her watch in the final minutes of descent. One from her executive assistant. The other from a direct contact within Altavia's legal department. The first message read: "Full behavioral analysis complete. Video timestamps and witness logs compiled. Submission confirmed. Immediate review pending. All eyes are on Flight 312. The second. Altavia Executive Crisis Team dispatched to Zurich Gate. Flight 312 flagged. Emergency review authorized. Stand by." She glanced toward the front of the cabin. Through the crack in the curtain separating the service galley, she saw movement, shadows, urgency. Voices hushed to a tone that could only mean one thing: they knew. As the aircraft coasted to a full stop and the chimes signaled the end of the flight, Alexandria stood, slowly, carefully adjusting the collar of her tailored blazer. She retrieved her leather bag from the overhead with one fluid motion and stepped into the aisle. Passengers behind her were still fussing with seatbelts and smartphones. But ahead, right outside the door, 2 figures waited. One was a tall man in a dark charcoal suit, holding a slim tablet and wearing an earpiece. His name tag, discreet but polished, read, Brandon Ellis, Regional Executive, Altavia Europe. Beside him stood a sharp-eyed woman in a muted gray skirt suit. Her expression was unreadable, her posture almost military. The tag on her lapel read, Amira Leclerc, Legal Affairs, Geneva Division. As Alexandria exited the aircraft, both executives stepped forward. "Welcome to Zurich, Ms. Cole," Brandon said, his voice carefully measured. "On behalf of Altavia, we would like to sincerely apologize for." Alexandria didn't stop walking. Her heels clicked softly on the jet bridge floor. She passed between them without turning her head, her words slicing the air behind her like the final line in a closing argument. "No need to apologize. This is just the beginning." She never looked back. Behind her, Brandon and Amira exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They had read the report. They had seen the video. They understood the weight of what had just touched down, not just a flight, but the failure of a system. And they knew what came next. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew, including Chelsea Whitman, disembarked through the rear exit. Their expressions relaxed, routine. Chelsea walked at the front of the group, her posture confident, her smile faintly lingering as if nothing had gone wrong. In her mind, Alexandria Cole was just a difficult passenger. An overly sensitive businesswoman upset over a missing meal. Nothing serious. Certainly not the kind of incident that required escalation. She was already thinking about the martini she'd order at the airport hotel bar, about the story she'd share later with colleagues. "Some folks just expect too much," she imagined herself saying. But the hallway outside wasn't empty. Instead of casual hotel check-ins and crew shuttles, a silent group awaited them. 3 men in identical black suits. 2 women in red-badged Altavia uniforms. 1 corporate attorney holding a tablet that displayed a flashing screen. Flight 312, Mandatory Ethics Debrief, Group 7. Immediate. Chelsea's stride faltered. The smile faded. She looked left, then right, hoping for some kind of explanation. But none came. The other crew members froze, their faces pale. Even Ronald Green, who had seemed composed the entire flight, now stared straight ahead, silent. Flight 312 crew, said the lead investigator. Please proceed to interview room 2. This is a formal internal inquiry in accordance with Article 6.3 of the Global Service Conduct Code. No one spoke. No one dared. They were led down a long hallway, white lights, quiet floors, no phones, no escape. Each crew member was taken into a separate room. Each room had a camera. A legal observer. A folder filled with data they had never expected anyone to collect. Chelsea sat across from an investigator who never raised her voice. The questions came one by one, neutral, surgical. Ms. Whitman, do you recall serving Ms. Cole during the first-class meal service? Yes. I did, Chelsea answered, her throat suddenly dry. Can you explain why 5 passengers with pre-ordered meals were served premium entrees, and only Ms. Cole received an economy-grade substitute? I think the system had an error. It happens. The investigator tapped her tablet. Our records show her order was confirmed 7 days ago. Also verified at boarding. Do you still maintain that it was an error? I don't know. Another tap. Do you recognize this footage? The video played Chelsea placing the cold sandwich in front of Alexandria without a word. Her shrug. Her walk away. Her smile when offering dessert to the white male passengers. Chelsea didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because the system had spoken for her. And it had remembered everything. The walls of the Zurich investigation office were clean, modern, and silent, but inside them, the air was thick with consequence. Becky Whitman, no longer the confident Chelsea of the cabin, sat rigid in her chair, her palms pressed together, her fingers trembling despite her practiced composure. Across from her, the lead investigator, a composed woman in a navy suit, continued without raising her voice. We're not here to speculate, Ms. Whitman, she said, scrolling through her tablet. We're here to evaluate facts, your service pattern, behavioral data, and interaction history with high-tier passengers over the last 24 months. Chelsea's eyes darted around the room. There was no phone. No ally. No place to retreat. The footage they had already shown her had been more than enough to crack the shield she had worn for years. The shrug. The absence of apology. The tray. And then the montage side-by-side comparisons of her treatment of white passengers versus passengers of color. Every interaction time-stamped. Every smile, every glance, every omission, analyzed. The investigator continued. Do you remember your remark in the break room on August 17 last year? I don't. Chelsea stopped herself. She did remember. The investigator didn't wait. She tapped her screen again. The transcript appeared on the wall. Some passengers act like they're Michelle Obama just because they bought a first-class seat. Bread and water is enough. Chelsea's throat closed. She didn't remember anyone recording it. But of course she had forgotten about the internal language analysis monitoring Altavia had quietly installed on high-risk crews after a prior scandal. A program designed to track code switching, unprofessional remarks, and discriminatory subtext. And it had remembered everything. The investigator set down her tablet. You're not being evaluated solely for how you treated one passenger. You're being evaluated for how a system like ours allowed your behavior to persist unchecked, protected, rationalized. Outside the room, Alexandria Cole had already left the airport. She hadn't stayed for the interviews. She didn't need to. She was now seated in the back of a black Mercedes sedan heading toward Lake Zurich, escorted by local security as part of the International Economic Summit delegation. Her face remained unreadable. Calm. She didn't speak as her phone vibrated again. Another update from Avery. All core documentation submitted to Altavia's Board of Cultural Ethics. Confirmed receipt. Secondary investigations launched into prior flagged employees. Global systems scan now underway. The phrase global systems scan wasn't a metaphor. Colteca's proprietary AI had already been connected to a subset of Altavia's service databases under a long-standing innovation partnership. And now, with full emergency clearance granted, Avery had authorized a scan across 28 months of crew behavior, thousands of flights, millions of interactions. The findings came fast. February 2022, a black woman entrepreneur seated in business class repeatedly pressed the call button. No attendant responded for 17 minutes. October 2023, 2 Asian passengers were served after every other white passenger on Flight 427, despite boarding first and requesting service early. March 2024, a South Asian finance executive was given a random secondary ID check twice during in-flight beverage service, by the same crew cluster that had served Chelsea Whitman. Each report had been closed with boilerplate excuses: glitch, timing error, no evidence of intent. But now, with bias detection tools analyzing facial expression changes, service sequence, and language tone, a different pattern emerged. Not blatant racism. Something quieter. More dangerous. A culture of professional exclusion, masked by procedure. And it was all linked by data, by footage, by behavior. Inside the Zurich headquarters of Altavia, CEO Leonard Trent stared at the 23-page preliminary investigation document now sitting on his desk. A red flag marked the top corner: Level 1 crisis. Ethics system breach. He scanned the names involved. He saw the footage of Chelsea's shrug. He saw the numbers. And he saw the name at the center of it all. Complainant, Alexandria Cole. Title, CEO, Coltech Dynamics. Status, Global Strategic Partner. Outcome, request for cultural audit initiated and approved. Leonard turned to his executive board. Not one of them spoke. Not because they didn't understand the magnitude, but because none of them had seen this coming. A woman in Seat 1A had just exposed what 1 million diversity training modules had failed to prevent: the unchecked decay of empathy in elite service. Leonard cleared his throat. Effective immediately, he said, the entire crew of Flight 312 is suspended pending full investigation. We are expanding the review to include every flight associated with these individuals. We will issue a formal apology. He paused. And we will invite Ms. Cole to serve as a cultural advisor to redesign our global service ethics program. One of the directors raised an eyebrow. You want her to help rewrite the rules? Leonard's reply came without hesitation. No. I want her to build the new system. Back at her hotel overlooking the still waters of Lake Zurich, Alexandria stood alone on the balcony. She held no phone, no script, no glass of wine. Just silence and the memory of that sandwich tray. Not the taste, she never touched it. But the moment it landed in front of her. That moment had opened something. Not in anger, but in calculation. Her assistant's final message of the night arrived quietly. Altavia board has confirmed all motions. Emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Whitman suspended. Cultural reform initiative to be proposed. Alexandria didn't reply. She simply closed the message and slipped the phone into her jacket pocket. No press release. No statement. No post. Because this wasn't about making noise. It was about making sure the system never fell asleep again. By morning, the story had moved beyond Zurich. It was no longer confined to airline boardrooms or private inboxes. It had reached headlines. The New York Times: Black CEO denied premium meal in first class triggers global service audit. The Guardian: when luxury excludes, a cold sandwich and the system behind it. Forbes: from boardroom to cabin, Alexandria Cole's silent revolution. The footage hadn't leaked. Not officially. But a single photo taken by a fellow passenger seated 2 rows back had captured the moment Alexandria sat before her untouched sandwich tray, staring forward with steel in her eyes and elegance in her posture. The image was shared over 12 million times in less than 24 hours. Beneath it, a single caption began to spread like wildfire. I understand now. It wasn't loud. It wasn't inflammatory. But for thousands, it was familiar. People from all corners of the world, executives, flight attendants, restaurant servers, consultants, and students began sharing their own stories. Moments when they had been overlooked, undervalued, erased. The hashtag trended within a day, hashtag Seat 1A. Not everyone who used it had ever flown first class. Many had never even flown. But the message was bigger than air travel. It was about the rooms people are allowed into, and the subtle rules that still decide who belongs once they're there. Altavia Airlines' New York office reported over 9,000 emails requesting cultural reform and transparency. 3 major investment partners contacted the London executive branch demanding an internal seminar on unconscious bias. And in Geneva, the U.S. Secretary of Transportation placed a direct call to Altavia's global CEO Leonard Trent, requesting a formal statement regarding equity in the luxury aviation sector. Through it all, Alexandria Cole remained silent. No interviews. No statements. No press tour. Because her presence had already said everything. That same day, she sat quietly in a private conference room at her hotel with 3 young women, each in their 20s, each women of color, each working in hospitality. They had requested a private meeting. They didn't want photos or endorsements. They simply wanted to know, how did you not break? We want to learn to speak up like you, one of them said. Alexandria shook her head. I didn't speak up, she replied. I let the system speak. And I made sure this time, it couldn't ignore itself. Outside, the lake remained still. But beneath its surface, currents moved. Deep, relentless. 3 days later, Altavia Airlines held a historic press conference in Geneva. The first of its kind. A formal apology, yes, but more than that, a declaration. On stage stood Leonard Trent, the company's CEO, flanked by board members and cultural analysts. But for the first time in the airline's history, the keynote was delivered not by a corporate executive, but by the passenger who had changed everything. Alexandria Cole took the stage in a crisp ivory suit. No jewelry. No makeup team. No bodyguards. On her lapel was a small silver pin, a minimalist, carved into the shape of a seat back. She spoke without notes. Without rehearsals. Just clarity. I'm not here because I was denied a meal, she began. I'm here because for far too long, the luxury service industry has equated wealth with whiteness, privilege with presence, and silence with consent. She didn't name Becky Whitman. She didn't need to. She simply described the feeling of being called guest when others were greeted by name. Of being asked twice to confirm her seat when others simply walked in. Of the cold sandwich that wasn't about hunger but about being dismissed without anyone noticing. Until someone finally did. I'm not asking to be served, she said. I'm asking not to be excluded. The room remained still. She ended with a line not directed at Altavia, but at the world watching. Not everyone sits in seat 1A. But everyone deserves to be treated like they belong. And then she stepped down. She didn't linger. She didn't wave. She simply left, walking past executives, journalists, and cameras, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Behind her, policies were already changing. Altavia implemented mandatory bias training for 100% of international crew within 60 days. They launched a dedicated passenger equity division with direct lines to senior leadership. A cultural audit framework co-designed by Coltech would now analyze service data across all luxury routes. And Alexandria Cole? She was named strategic advisor for global equity in service, an unpaid position she only accepted under one condition. That the first reform be visible not in training manuals, but in behavior. On her next flight weeks later from Atlanta to Cape Town, she didn't mention her name. Didn't request special treatment. But as she boarded, she noticed something. On the headrest of seat 1A was a discreet silver plaque. Not flashy. Just 4 words engraved in clean lettering. Reserved. Seat of change. And below it, in smaller font. We remember you. She smiled not because she needed acknowledgement, but because she knew someone else, somewhere, would sit there next time. And they'd feel it too. That they weren't alone anymore. The revolution didn't come with protest signs. It didn't roar across headlines with shouting voices or dramatic confrontations at gate counters. It arrived quietly, one policy at a time, one meeting at a time, one server looking someone in the eyes and calling them by name instead of guest. Alexandria Cole never raised her voice, but the world had heard her loud and clear. Inside Altavia's headquarters in Geneva, the transformation was no longer theoretical. Internal memos flooded departments globally. The subject line was stamped in red. Urgent, Culture Reform Implementation, Phase 1. The first document was signed personally by CEO Leonard Trent and distributed to over 22,000 employees across international hubs. It included mandatory training in unconscious bias, a digital feedback tool for first-class passengers, and a new audit team assigned to review 36 months of crew behavior across priority routes. But buried halfway through the document, quietly but deliberately, was a name not often seen in airline paperwork. Framework co-designed by strategic partner Alexandria Cole, CEO, Coltech Dynamics. For most, it was just another internal bulletin. But for those who understood what had happened on Flight 312, it was the first sign that silence no longer guaranteed protection. A cold sandwich tray wasn't a meal, it was evidence. And the person who sat in seat 1A had made the system remember what it wanted so long to forget. At Altavia's HR division in Geneva, Chelsea Whitman sat alone in a quiet office, clutching the personal file that once had earned her international routes, leadership mentorship, and employee awards. Now, every page was under review. She wasn't suspended just for one incident, she was suspended because the system had finally opened its eyes and looked at the pattern. The jokes she thought were private. The break-room comments she believed would vanish into the air. The invisible decisions to serve one person first, or skip another's call button. They were no longer intangible. They had been translated into data points, behavior profiles, internal transcripts. The line she once wrote in a joking email, "Black passengers always act like they're the CEO," was now being read aloud by Altavia's legal counsel, not as gossip, but as evidence of cultural malpractice. Chelsea wasn't alone. 2 other crew members, Ronald Green and another junior flight attendant, were placed under behavioral review. Not because of what they said, but because of what they allowed. The shrugs. The silence. The complicit stillness when injustice passed right in front of them. The system had once been silent, too. Now, it was building a memory. Outside of Altavia, the shockwave spread further. International media didn't stop with headlines. The Washington Post featured Alexandria's story on its social equity front page, a seat, a statement. The article didn't focus on confrontation. It focused on architecture, the invisible kind, cultural infrastructure designed to exclude quietly. In New York, a tech symposium on AI ethics opened with a clip of Alexandria's moment in the cabin. No dialogue. No sound. Just the still image, her in 1A, face calm, eyes forward, the untouched tray before her. As the lights dimmed, a single phrase appeared on screen. She didn't need to shout. She simply refused to be invisible. Back in her office atop Coltech Tower, Alexandria received a letter. Not from a politician. Not from a journalist. It came from a 16-year-old girl in North Carolina. A high school student named Lauren, who had been told by her counselor to consider a more realistic career path than AI. The girl had read about Alexandria. She'd seen the photo. She had watched the conference and listened, not to the speech, but to the silence Alexandria had carried like a shield. Her letter ended with a question: what do I do when they say someone like me doesn't belong? Alexandria responded the next morning. She didn't dictate. She didn't advise. She wrote in longhand, her strokes clean and deliberate on crisp white paper. People will look at you and wonder what seat you're allowed to sit in. Don't argue. Don't shout. Just walk in, sit down, and get to work. Let your presence do what they never planned for exist. And when they ask how you got there, tell them you didn't get permission. You just stopped asking for it. P.S. If they try to move you, ask them who the seat was built for. Months later, at an industry event focused on global service standards, a video played in front of hotel CEOs, luxury train executives, and first-class airline directors. The image was familiar: Alexandria Cole, composed, silent, seated in 1A. The footage played from a passenger camera angle, paired with orchestral music, no voiceover, no narration. The screen faded to black, and then a final quote appeared. True reform isn't loud. It's consistent. The audience didn't applaud. Not because they weren't moved, but because they understood they had just witnessed something sacred. Something uncomfortable. Something real. On another transatlantic flight later that fall, Alexandria boarded without ceremony. She gave no name. No VIP announcement. She stepped into the cabin with the same quiet grace, passing new attendants trained under her co-designed protocol. As she reached seat 1A, she noticed something new. Not a plaque. Not a pin. But a folded note tucked neatly into the seat pocket. She opened it. Inside, in simple handwriting, were the words. We're learning. Thank you for making us look closer. She folded the note and placed it in her jacket. Outside, the sky was still blue. Inside, the cabin was still quiet. But this time, silence didn't mean erasure. It meant change was still working just beneath the surface, exactly where the system used to hide. Alexandria Cole never expected to be a symbol. She didn't plan the moment. She didn't call attention to herself. She didn't even raise her voice. All she had done was refuse to be erased, and the world noticed. By winter, Altavia Airlines had launched its most ambitious internal campaign in decades. The name was simple: presence. It wasn't about customer satisfaction. It was about accountability. Every flight crew, every route, every manager underwent not just training, but immersion cultural equity labs co-designed by Colteca's ethics division. Every incident that used to be shrugged off now triggered a formal alert and review. At the center of it all, there was a new seat 1A, no longer just a location. Now it was a reminder. A living symbol across 118 international routes. On the headrest of every seat 1A, a line was stitched in silver thread. Service is not silence. Equity is not optional. And behind those words, the echo of a woman who didn't protest, didn't record, didn't plead. She simply watched. Understood. And acted. In boardrooms across Europe and North America, companies began referencing the Cole incident as a case study. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was precise. Executives whispered about it in training seminars: be mindful. Remember what happened on Flight 312. Not with fear. But with respect. Because the story wasn't about a collapse, it was about a correction. Colteca's stock climbed 12% in the weeks following the incident, not from public sympathy, but because investors understood, this was leadership. The kind that didn't need cameras to prove it. The kind that could shift culture not with outrage, but with outcomes. But the part Alexandria remembered most didn't happen at 35,000 feet. It happened quietly, in her office one rainy Thursday. A letter had arrived, official, formal, embossed with the seal of the Global Aviation Service Board. Inside was a single line: your actions catalyzed what policies failed to do for years. Beneath that, an offer to lead a new advisory council designed to oversee luxury service equity across the aviation industry. Global jurisdiction. Policy authority. And one condition: it would bear her name. The Alexandria Cole Standard. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked Manhattan's skyline, the clouds hanging low, the glass slick with rain. She thought about that sandwich tray. About the silence. About how close she came to doing what so many others had done before nothing. And then she nodded. Not for herself. For everyone else who had ever sat down and felt the room tilt away from them, felt the air grow colder, the smiles more distant, the service slower, not because of what they did, but because of who they were. This wasn't about a seat anymore. It was about every boardroom, every lounge, every quiet corner of privilege where fairness had once been optional. Not anymore. At the International Conference on Service Ethics held 6 months later in Oslo, the event opened not with a keynote speaker, but with a short film. No narrator. Just music. And a single, iconic scene, Alexandria Cole in seat 1A. The tray before her. Untouched. Then the footage cut to Chelsea Whitman's shrug. The walk away. The subtle sneer. And finally, to the data. The numbers. The silent accumulation of indifference. The room fell silent. At the end, the screen displayed only this: she didn't speak. The system did. And in that silence, global leaders finally heard what they had missed for so long. 1 year later, on a spring afternoon flight from San Francisco to Tokyo, a young black woman named Elise boarded first class for the first time in her life. She was a newly promoted product lead, traveling internationally to pitch her team's design to a potential investor. As she stepped into the cabin, nervous, holding her laptop close to her chest, a smiling attendant greeted her not with, "Hello, guest," but, "Good afternoon, Ms. Palmer. Welcome aboard. We're honored to have you." She blinked, stunned. She hadn't told anyone her name yet. But it was there, already recognized. Already seen. She took her seat 1A. And there, on the tray table, was a handwritten note on ivory cardstock: "No matter who doubts you, no matter how quietly they try to erase you. Sit. Stay. Let the system adjust to you." At the bottom was a single signature. AC. Elise smiled through tears. She sat down. She opened her laptop. And she knew, this seat had been fought for. And now, it belonged to her too. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. All it took was the right action, at the right time, in the right seat. Alexandria Cole didn't just change a policy. She changed the expectation. And because of her, a system that once whispered, "You don't belong," now says, "We see you." If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity no matter where they sit, share this story. Comment below: have you ever been made to feel invisible in a space you earned your way into? We'd love to hear your voice. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Because here, stories like this don't go unheard. Sometimes, injustice doesn't come in shouts, it arrives in silence. It hides in shrugged shoulders, selective smiles, and systems that pretend not to see. But change doesn't always need to be loud. True power is knowing when to stay calm, when to gather evidence, and when to act with such precision that the system has no choice but to confront itself. Alexandria Cole didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. This story reminds us, you don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to refuse to be erased. Leave a comment below to let me know what you think about this story. And subscribe to the channel to follow more meaningful stories. Thanks for listening.